Here we go. Andrew, we're going to talk about life science and drug development and discovery that you lead it up. You work on it with Morgan. What's your prediction for 2025?
We're in the beginning of a decade-long transition of newer modalities that we've been seeing for a while and been talking about for a while, like CRISPR gene editing, gene therapy, immunotherapy, transitioning from rare disease focus to chronic disease focus and literally coming for the masses if they're going after obesity and other conditions like that. And in my mind, in the analogy, I think that's hard to fully grasp in today's world. We always think about drug development as focused historically on both small molecules and antibody drug discovery. But antibodies weren't discovered until 1975, and the first drug approval wasn't until 1986. That was less than 40 years ago. CRISPR-Cas9 was first talked about as a gene editing tool in 20. And so I think we are now getting to a maturation phase where you're starting to see this shift in the comfort level with the technology, some of the delivery challenges being solved for, some of the safety and ethical concerns being solved for, where they're no longer solely focused on rare diseases, where there's still plenty of opportunity, but also start going towards some of these larger, more chronic indications, partly buoyed by the fact that there's a lot of excitement about large chronic conditions within the biotech ecosystem right now, given the success of GLP-1s and the potential market size of being $100 billion over time. There's a lot of interest in seeing where else can these technologies be applied. And I think there's a potential opportunity over the next decade for these somewhat niche modalities being used ubiquitously to treat many different diseases in a hyper personalized way. And so I think we're just going to see more and more of that trend in 2025 and a much larger comfort level with exploring and investing in larger conditions for these newer modalities. Curious if anyone thinks I'm too early on that trend, too late on that trend, or where you might see the market evolving. And maybe I'll turn it to Morgan first. And then I also want to get the perspective from Steve as someone who's been a biotech investor for longer than me, what he saw in that evolution and in some of the other types of modalities and how they transition over time. But maybe Morgan, just curious your reaction on that first.
Yeah, I think you're spot on. I think a lot of this is being spawned from the success of what's happened in the metabolic medicine class and acknowledging that we can develop therapies against these large chronic indications. I also am thinking just a lot about what is the definition of a large chronic indication. My heart disease is different from your heart disease, is different from anyone's. And we now also have a lot more diagnostic infrastructure for being able to look at the genomic signatures within chronic disease. And so if you're looking in particular kinds of heart failure, we can now segment it through so many different sub causes of that heart failure and really stratify these patients on a molecular level, which again, if you're taking a fraction or percentage of an already large space, it's still going to be a large number of patients to treat and to care for. So I think there's a lot of really exciting reasons within that. I guess I'd flip the question back to you and ask, are there any specialty areas or big indications that you're particularly excited about as we head into the new year?
I think areas where there's significant genetic validation. And so cardiovascular, cardiometabolic disease are clearly areas of interest. Immunology is another area where we're seeing a large focus on it, immunotherapy having a potential impact or cell therapy having an impact in those indications. But then I think there's also opportunity so in the neuroscience space, we're decades behind where we have been in oncology and other types of indications where there has been a whole host of data delineating genetic markers, and we're starting to see that evolve in a way that's going to be really productive and fruitful in the coming decade with a ton of opportunity to treat a lot of patients in a really effective way.
One thought, I don't know as much about the biotech industry as y'all, but as I think about kind of standard of care and like the bar that these new drugs are going to have to hit, I think is going to be a lot higher, just given that there's drugs out there for this. And they're going to have to be like best in class. The best example is the GLP-1, right? You saw kind of holy grail outcomes to be able to see the impact that it's had. So I do think that the bar is going to be a lot higher for those drugs.
I think that's possible. I totally agree. And I think that comes from a place of being concerned about potential safety issues, and then also potentially from an economic standpoint of how do we pay for these historically very expensive therapies. Just given the specificity of delivery, we're starting to see some of the other bolus of data we're seeing in terms of the safety profile of some of these. I do think we're going to slowly transition to a place where there's a greater level of comfort in these larger indications. And it might then come down to a patient and physician choice of would you rather take a one and done opportunity, or do you want to be on this for a chronic period of time and injecting yourself every week or every couple of weeks. And so that may be something that's a personal decision that is made, and there likely will be an opportunity for those, assuming it is safe. And I totally agree that bar needs to be high. I think there is a burden of proof on how efficacious these need to be relative to standard of care. with the same level of safety, especially if you're going after large indications. Point very well taken.
Yeah, significant quality of life improvement is
Yeah.
a good point.
Steve, is the old guy who has been investing both in biotech and health tech for a long time. What do you think about this as a potential theme or trend?
It's funny. I feel like I'm like Michael Jordan. I'm like an old guy trying to play basketball against Anthony Edwards here. So I'm dating myself. And by the way, I'm no Michael Jordan. But I guess I had the same questions. It sounds like motherhood and apple pie. This is amazing, right? Better technology, more targeted delivery, presumably better efficacy and safety profile, much larger TAMs. What's the risk that I'm going to put it back on you? What's the risk, the main risk that entrepreneurs should be thinking about? Because obviously everyone should be flocking to this given the market sizes. Like what keeps you up at night about this prediction, Andrew and Morgan?
Yeah, I think it really is that burden of proof on safety. And also, what does the target product profile need to look like in order to be commercially viable in these populations? And I think there's likely going to be a scenario where it is reserved for later stage refractory patients in some of these larger conditions. And then as the safety data emerges, it is likely going to be studied in larger, earlier stage in the progression of disease conditions and patients. And that will slowly allow for the comfort level that we all need to see. But in 1986, the first antibody was used for kidney rejection as an immunosuppressant. It was thought of as a very short period therapy because no one thought you'd ever be dosing those chronically at that point in time. And we've clearly made the transition before. I think the question is, how long is it going to take to get that comfort level? And I think we're now at a point where I see a lot of opportunity to define that path as an entrepreneur, where you need to be really mindful of those concerns and that burden of proof that Sophia talked about.
Yeah. And I think pricing too would be my guess, right? At the other end, once you get the drug works and gets it, like, how are you going to price these things? Because
For sure.
we already seen one GLP-1 is going to just be a huge, but by the GLP-1 is going to be a huge cost burden. But then again, you think about, to Sophia referenced, all of the gold standard data, not only had in weight loss, but then you see all the derivative impacts on other areas of health, cardiology, nephrology. Even now they're talking about, and Morgan, you probably could speak this deeper, like its impact on the neurology space, dementia, Alzheimer's. Holy cow. So maybe, I don't know, maybe if you have a great one of these drugs targeted for heart health, like, holy cow, we know there's so many downstream impacts that maybe pricing does withstand, and you can price because there's so many beyond the heart. There's so many other beneficial.
No, we need new value-based payment models for a lot of these drugs.
Yeah.
And left for another prediction that we won't be discussing, but you should be reading about.
There we go. There we go.
Yeah.
So once we get these drugs approved, next year we're going to talk about value-based care payment models for these drugs. I like
Well,
it.
there's certainly an opportunity on the health tech side for value-based payment models, thinking through the logistics of these much more complicated therapies. And we won't go into depth on that, but I definitely agree that there's an opportunity to tackle there as well.
I would just add two other thoughts that are coming to mind as you all are talking, which is like, one, let's not confuse the word common for simple, right? These are common diseases that are highly complex, highly heterogeneous, as we're even seeing in the metabolic medicine space. So
Yep.
really making sure we're getting to the right patients. Again, even if it's still a large number of patients, but figuring out what biomarkers we should be looking as we're subsegmenting these common diseases, right? Alzheimer's is not a monolithic presentation by any means. And actually, we have some good genetic data there. The other thing I was just thinking about as you all were talking in terms of recouping costs is I think the trials for a lot of these large indication drugs are going to be very expensive to run. So really thinking about how to resource development effectively, I think should be top of mind for any companies that are going after these areas.
That's a really
Great
good one.
point.